So, in keeping with our idea that successful recovery is ultimately going to result in some type of transformational experience for the client, what we're going to do here is take a closer look at what this journey might actually look like. And in particular, we're going to identify some specific elements that can actually be used to map out the process of what it takes to get there. And I'm going to start off with what's going to seem like a really obvious statement, but it's really easy to overlook. And that's the simple fact that successful recovery has got to start off with a solid foundation. And the problem is this can be really deceptive as far as knowing whether that foundation is really going to be solid or not. I describe it as being like ice on the surface of a lake. Looking at it from above, you might not be able to tell how thick it is. It might only be 1/8 of an inch thick and a bird couldn't land on it, or it could be 3 feet thick and you could drive a truck across it. And one of the things that I see over and over is that it's not uncommon for clients to leave treatment thinking that their foundation is more solid than it really is. They're fired up, they're committed to their recovery, feel like they have a good plan in place, and then life starts happening. And that's when we find out how solid their foundation really is or not. Sometimes it's 3 feet thick and everything goes great, or like I said at the beginning, the unfortunate truth is that it's not uncommon to see clients get out of treatment and things blow up really fast. And those would be the cases where the ice is only 1/8 of an inch thick. And so it only makes sense that our top priority should be focused on making sure that we're establishing as solid a foundation as possible from the outset of treatment. And one of the most absolute effective tools that I've landed on for making sure that this is happening is by using what's called the stages of change model. This breaks down the process that anybody's going to go through when they're changing what would be identified as a problematic behavior. So in this section, I'm going to give you an introduction to what this looks like. And we'll start off by applying this to the client's journey through treatment. That's a little hint that we might be taking a look at how we might apply this to the family transformation as well. But for now, we're just going to focus on the client's process. So, the first stage is called the pre-contemplation stage. That's the denial stage. A problem exists, but the person's unaware that the problem exists. Then the second stage is called the contemplation stage. That's where the person begins to take a look at the behavior to make a decision as to whether they think it's a problem or not. They start to weigh things out, benefits versus the risks, where it's gotten me versus where I want to be, harmful consequences, all to make a decision. Is my substance use a problem or not? Check yes or check no. And if they decide that yes, it is a problem, then the third stage is called the preparation stage. This is where they develop a plan for overcoming the problem. Then the fourth stage is called the action stage, and this is where they implement the plan by practicing new behaviors. And you'll notice there that it says that the action stage should last at least 3 to 6 months. That's because there has to be enough time for the new behaviors to become routine. This can't be something that they're just sort of into for a couple weeks, but then just let it fizzle out. Some of you may know what I'm talking about if you've been through this before, but here's an example of how the stages of change can give us a measure of where they're at in their progress. We don't know if treatment's really been successful until the action stage has been completely satisfied, because that's when they'd move into the final stage, which is called the maintenance stage. And that's characterized by consistent, symptom-free behavior, no signs of the original problem. So 2 important points about using the stages of change model as a tool for helping clients move through the treatment process. First, it provides a realistic perspective of how long the treatment process really takes. That point about the action stage lasting 3 to 6 months, that's a really long time, especially when there's a tendency for clients to think that they're fine a lot sooner than they really are. Sometimes because they've done well and they've had a good attitude for a couple of weeks, they think they're in the maintenance stage, when the reality might be that they haven't even scratched the surface of the contemplation stage yet. And so to put this in perspective, you got to remember that that 3 to 6 month period of the action stage, that doesn't even start until after the contemplation and preparation stages have been completed. And that could take a couple of months in and of itself. And so then that ties into a second important point about the stages of change, and that's that you can't skip stages. In just about any case of relapse or failed treatment, you can usually go back and pinpoint to where a problem occurred relative to how thorough they were in each of these stages. And the fact is, most problems occur in either the contemplation or the preparation stage. So, for example, one of the biggest reasons for treatment failure is premature withdrawal from the treatment process. That's quitting before you're done. And there's two common statements we'll sometimes hear that are big red flags that this is coming. Say we've got a client who's been through residential treatment, and she's in sober living now, and she's doing IOP treatment. And she's got all sorts of rules that she's supposed to be following, and she's starting to get a little tired of all that. And there's a little squabble here about something that she wants to do. And then there's another fight over here. And then all of a sudden, one day she blows up and she says, "I've had it with all this. I never even believed I had a problem to begin with." Now, some family members that hearing that might get sort of freaked out and start thinking, "Oh no, treatment's been a waste of time and it's all gone down the drain." But as an educated consumer who understands how this stages of change model works, you're going to know that the correct response would be, "What? You don't believe you have a problem? Oh, I'm sorry. You obviously have some more contemplation work to do. And I guess we need to revise your treatment plan." Or the second thing you might hear him say is, "I'm tired of all this treatment. I don't need this anymore. I'm doing fine." And in that case, you just say, "Oh, I'm sorry. You evidently didn't get the part of the plan about how long all of this is going to take. And obviously, you have some more preparation work to do. And you revise the treatment plan accordingly." Put a 1 in the chat box if you've heard either of those before. So one of the things we want to be careful of is not rushing them through the process too quickly by assuming that they're further along than they really are. Because the reality is, it's not that hard for a client in treatment to get to the point of saying, "Yeah, my drug use is a problem," and they'll agree to go to a few AA meetings when they get out of treatment. But here's where the quality of the foundation comes into play. Because what ends up happening a lot of the time is the client will get out of treatment, and the family and the counselors will have to start arguing with them about going to their meetings, or they don't want to do IOP, or they're still hanging out with their using friends. And we end up in power struggles because they're not following through with the plan. We're expecting them to be in the action stage, but if they just skimmed over their preparation work, they may have agreed to a plan without paying a heck of a lot of attention as to what the plan really entailed. Or if their contemplation work wasn't solid, they may not even believe that they really have a problem. And if someone doesn't believe their drug use is really a problem, they're not going to be motivated to follow a plan, and we're banging our head against the wall because we're operating under the assumption that they're further along than they really are. Not that there's anything wrong with them being where they are, we just want to make sure that they're focusing on the right part of their treatment. Even if you have to carry this over to the next level of care. It's not uncommon these days for clients to get moved out of residential treatment and still have more work to do in the contemplation or preparation stages. And that's okay. What's important is that we stay on top of where they really are in their process and keep working on that until we know that they're solid. That's the key to building a foundation that's ultimately going to support long-term recovery. Okay, so that's the client's process. Let's switch this around and see what this might look like for the family going through their own transformational process. This same stages of change model is going to apply to anyone who makes the decision to address a substance use issue with a loved one and support them as they go through the treatment process. So, just like with the client, this is going to start off in the pre-contemplation stage. But for families, this would be the period of time that substance use is a problem for the user, but you don't realize that the problem exists. You maybe weren't aware that anything was going on, or at least you didn't realize how much was actually going on. Or you may have been aware of the use, but it never crossed your mind that it might be a problem. The point here is that the family can be in just as much denial as the substance user. But then the contemplation stage would be when you start wondering about it. You start paying more attention to what's going on, maybe start looking up online how to tell if somebody's an alcoholic or how do you know if somebody's addicted or not. And at some point, if you land on the decision that, yes, I believe there's a problem here, the preparation stage would be where you start developing a plan for how to address the problem. You might start researching rehab, start talking to people to get advice. Should we start off with counseling? How do you help somebody who doesn't want help? Do we do some kind of intervention? You come up with a plan for dealing with the problem. And then that's going to bring you to the action stage. And on the family side of this, we're actually going to have sort of a two-part process here, because the first part's going to be doing all the things that fall under the umbrella of providing effective support for your loved one's treatment. And this is going to turn out to be one of the most critical areas for families to focus on, because this is the place, remember that slide earlier that talked about family participation being able to make or break a case? This is where that happens, because this can go one of two ways. There's the car repair model. Remember that one? That's where the family just drops the client off and comes back a few weeks later expecting them to be fixed without having any idea about what went on in there. And I'm just going to be sort of blunt here. That's one of the biggest mistakes a family can make when you've got a loved one in treatment. Because you'll also remember I talked about the untapped potential that the family represents for improving treatment outcomes. And for families, the action stage is where you cash in on that untapped potential. But that means that you're going to have some decisions to make about how much time and effort you want to invest with regard to your participation in their treatment. And that's going to start with you learning as much as you possibly can about what the clients are learning in treatment. That's to keep you out of the substitute teacher role that we talked about earlier. And the reason you want to stay out of the substitute teacher role is because without knowing it, you can end up sabotaging their treatment. And I'm going to be honest here, it happens a lot. Families who'd say that they want nothing more than their loved one's treatment to be successful oftentimes end up sabotaging it without even realizing that they're doing it. Here's a perfect example. Just the other day, I had a client tell me that his dad told him that he couldn't understand why he couldn't drink a few beers every once in a while. Now, I know for a fact that the client learned in treatment that drinking a few beers every once in a while was not going to be part of his recovery plan. Now, the client was laughing about this when he was telling me this because he knows better and he's serious about his recovery, and he was just telling me this as a comment as to how much denial his dad is still in. But you can see where if the client wasn't committed to recovery, this would be opening a door that a client who wants to use would gladly take advantage of. And before we know it, the whole treatment experience goes down the drain. And so this is all action stage stuff. Learning everything you possibly can, attending everything you possibly can. This is what we've been talking about as far as being proactive in your loved one's treatment. Now, the kicker here for families is that you almost have to do double duty here, because all this stuff that we're talking about so far is just in support of your loved one's recovery. But then we got this whole thing about you moving into your own recovery. And for that, you end up sort of having to go back through this stage as a change process again, only this time from the perspective of, do I actually need to establish my own recovery? And if so, what would that look like? And the things you end up doing for that become part of your own action stage as well. But here's where that paradox that we talked about earlier comes into play, and that's that you doing what you need to do for your own recovery ends up being the best thing you can do for your loved one's recovery. I'm going to repeat that one again. You doing what you need to do for your own recovery ends up being the best thing you can do for your loved one's recovery. And that's what's ultimately going to get you into the maintenance stage, which I'm going to characterize here on the family side as getting to that peace of mind place. No signs of the initial problem, which would be the worry, the stress, the lack of control that all come from that dynamic of revolving around the substance user. And so the really important point to recognize here is that the family's journey isn't dependent or contingent on the treatment client's journey. There's a lot of families who've dug in, done all the work, and gotten themselves to this peace of mind place when their loved ones never gotten past the denial stage. They get to a place of realizing that their happiness and serenity can't be tied to their loved one's progress. But that's when the magic happens, because the closer they get to that place, the more of an impact that actually has on the client's process. And that's typically when we see the most solid progress on the client side of this journey.